Most of my viewers would probably know this by now, but I was a Nintendo kid when I was growing up. Due to this, I never really got a chance to experience most of the heavy hitters on the other platforms. Sure, emulation was and is an option, but it's not something I really like doing unless it's for the sake of a video, and it's not like my laptop could even run these games back then. So, as a result, I'd often just watch all the cutscenes of these games on YouTube, like most kids who didn't own a console for a bunch of games they wanted to play would do. I think. As you can guess, the Ratchet and Clank series was one of them. I remember really loving the way these games were written, especially the first game, but playing them was just out of the question for me back then, and even when I got a setup that could actually emulate these games, I just kinda forgot. Eventually, Rift Apart, the latest game as of recording this video, came to PC, and I thought it was a solid game, but the writing left plenty to be desired, if I'm being nice. But what about that first game, you know, the one with a Ryan that I also loved? Well, I still never really got around to it. However, I invested in the PS5 this year, and since the PS5 can basically play almost any PS4 game, so it's basically a PS4 too, honestly, playing the 2016 reimagining, reboot, or whatever it is of the first game was a possibility for me. And would you know it, I found the game for $2 whole. Granted, it's the greatest hits version, so the box is all red and it sticks the hell out in my library, but for $2, why wouldn't you? I have heard pretty rough things about this title, but a lot of those things tend to come from people who grew up or played the original games, which isn't the case for me. So, I got the game, played through the main campaign, and... well, the video title speaks for itself, doesn't it? Man, it's been a while since I've bitched about a video game story on this channel, huh? But before I go on full on tirade here, it's worth mentioning that while the game is a reimagining of the PS2 original, the game is also a tie-in to the 2016 movie, and tie-in games are usually not good. Unsurprisingly, this game was pretty rushed and didn't have a lot of development time. Not to mention that because it was being developed alongside the movie, a lot of story beats kept on changing, so they just had to resort to making the game have an unreliable narrator, which didn't really pan out because his narration turns out to be the actual story. Oopsie. But this video isn't really about the development of this game, so I'll link a video down below that does a very good job explaining the whole backstory of this game, if you want to call it that. But as a result of this, there's a lot of moments where the game just abruptly jumps to random points from the movie, and... yeah, the story here seems to follow the movie's plot, but I can't say that for sure because I haven't watched the movie and I never plan to because I heard it was just not worth the time, and well, given that the story here is basically a taste of the movie, I can see why. The biggest flaw here is that it's just too generic. Ratchet here wants to be a hero, he meets a robot named Clank that makes it a reality, and everything is going on until the second act betrayal hits, then the third act redemption, and boom, story, plot, whatever. I get that's a simple hero's journey structure and all that, and it can be pulled off, but the problem is that you need an entertaining cast of characters, you know, like the meat and bones of a story kinda, and this game just doesn't have it. Ratchet here is just a marketable plushy pro tag who has nothing really going for him. We know he likes to build and shoot stuff and that he's a nerd, but like, that's about it. We don't get to learn more about him other than that. The same goes with the other character, Clank, and he's worse in this regard because despite being a titled character, he just doesn't have presence at all. He shows up and then he just kind of fades to the background for the rest of the game. And even in the segments where you're just playing as him, it's like... oh, I don't even know how to describe it, you just don't learn shit. The most you know is that he's just a warbot defect, and not to mention that despite the game being called Ratchet and Clank, these two just don't have any chemistry, they never interact, and when they do it's like the most bare bones thing ever. And there is a third character, Captain Quark, and he's basically a big shot superhero, which is basically his whole joke. He's washed up, and he ends up betraying his team as a result. And the problem is that, well, the game just puts way too much of a spotlight on him. He's one of the first characters you see, he's an unreliable narrator, and I'm pretty sure he has half, if not more, of the in-game dialogue, at least from what I heard. And I just don't care for this gag to begin with, so this is not doing me any favors, man. And as for the other characters, I can't say anything about them because they're just literal pieces of wood. So basically they're the same as the main characters, and even the villains are nothing. They're just mainly used for lame jokes, and the main villain literally gets booted in favor for another villain from the later games, or the third game I guess, whatever, because he's more popular, which Makes no sense because wouldn't you want to see the main characters give the main villain his beating? Replacing him with some other dude who's just barely even interacting with a protagonist is just stupid, especially in like the last 10 minutes of the game or some shit, my god. But even with the characters, this game's biggest sin is the writing, because dear god, this game has to be the most unfunny like thing I have ever witnessed. This game is obsessed with jokes, like nothing can get past you. This level where a whole city's under attack and the head guy is going about canceling Casual Friday, like what? And even if that wasn't obvious enough, none of these jokes land. I cannot recall a single time where I laughed at any of these jokes actually. And the big part of that is because nobody just ever shuts up in this game. The characters never shut up, the shop vendor never shuts up, the narrator never shuts up, the weapons, the things you shoot the enemies with. The thing is, I usually like in-game dialogue if it's just short interaction with characters, and I love reading optional flavor text in general, but playing this game might as well be like being in a mental asylum at some point, because I sure felt like I was being driven to insanity. But fine, that's just a story. What about the game, the main part? Sure, a bad story in a game sucks, but a game can have a bad story and still be good if the gameplay part delivers. It's alright. Ratchet 2016 is basically a run and gun platformer. That sure was a jumble of words I just said. Regardless, you run, platform, and shoot things. The main focus is on the shooting part, so weapons are their primary focus here. There's a whole variety of weapons here, and each of them have their own pros and cons, so it's a matter of just playing around with which weapons you like the most. Obviously though, they have limited ammo, so you'll have to have multiple weapons to fall back on. And my advice, best first, worst last. At least that's how I roll. Anyways, it's clear that some weapons here are better than others. The Bouncer is a weapon from the second game that I think was also a pre-order bonus, but it's also free on the PS Store now. And while you only get 6 shots, this thing obliterates bosses. It's absolutely insane. And there's also silly weapons like the Redon't that just forces you into a dance because funny, the Pixelizer which I refuse to touch because, well, I think you know by now. And one last thing regarding the weapons is that, well, you can upgrade them permanently. Throughout the game you'll find these crystals, Raritanium I think, and with these crystals you can upgrade your weapons to make them permanently better. There's also all sorts of upgrades depending on the weapons, so it's really all up to personal preference. Again, there is also a leveling up system for the weapons and Ratchet, but for Ratchet this just increases his max health, and for weapons it usually increases his stats. But leveling up either of these fully restores your health and weapon ammo, so that's nice. Given you don't mind the game being paused, that is. But with that out of the way, what's the big flaw holding the gameplay back from being great in my eyes? Well, annoying dialogue and another reason we'll get to soon. It's just that the gameplay becomes, well, noise. See, this game always gives you something to do on each planet. The run and gunning is always a staple, but the game breaks it up now and then to give you variety. Thing is, there's nothing really engaging about it. Sure, in the first few hours it's fun and all, but around the halfway point I was just kinda going through the motions. Suddenly playing the game no longer felt like I was playing a game, it felt like I was taking notes in a class. Had this game been like 3-5 hours, I probably wouldn't have this complaint, but when your game is like 10 hours, then it definitely becomes an issue. And there are stinkers in this game, believe me. The worst one for me was a jetpack. At some point in the story, Clank gets a jetpack that lets you fly high, and to use it you have to press the L1 button while moving. Simple enough. The problem is when you have to fight in air, because you also have to press L2 to lock on your target, and my fingers just can't do it. I understand this is likely just a me issue, but dear god, the two boss fights that force this thing are abysmal. And one of them is the final boss too. Gives me more of a reason to hate that green fuck. The last stinker though had to be how hand-holdy this game is, because holy shit it's bad. So bad I feel like a toddler sometimes. While not a stinker though, there's these Clank levels that are basically amount of puzzles, and I didn't really think much of them. They're fine and all, but like the rest of the game I don't really feel anything playing these. At least I didn't have to shut my brain off. But remember that other reason I mentioned earlier? See, the thing with Sony games as of late is that they focus way too much on making these big budget movie experiences. And while I have enjoyed some of these games, and one can't deny the sheer amount of detail and effort put into these games, they come at the cost of the game looking great in stills and screenshots, but when you play the game, it all sort of just fades away. Oh, and they also cost a shit ton of money and take forever to make. Whoopsie. Well, what I'm getting at is that Ratchet 2016's presentation suffers from this problem heavily. Sure, it still looks good to this day, but when you play the game and all the issues start popping up, then it just goes away, you know? The first and most noticeable issue to me is that the excessive amount of motion blur, because I already don't like motion blur to begin with. So seeing this is basically my worst enemy ever. Every time you turn a damn camera, it smears everything into jelly. It's awful. And to make things even worse, this game goes so overboard with the amount of visual effects and shit flying on screen that when combined with the motion blur, it basically makes me feel nauseous after an hour. I'm glad that playing this on PS5 gives you 60 FPS, because playing this with 30 FPS on PS4 would have probably made me throw up. Another fault of the presentation are the cutscenes. When they're not just playing pre-rendered clips from a movie, they're literally just characters standing around and talking with stock animations. Hey, wait a minute. Other than that, there's really nothing else to say about the game graphically. It's a shining example of how bigger isn't just always better. If you ask me, all the game really needs to look good is just strong art direction. Hopefully, Sony realizes that soon. Need help sleeping? Yeah, this game's soundtrack is boring. You've probably already noticed that I've been using music from other sources than the game I'm talking about, because, well, Ratchet 2016's music is just literally what I can only describe as noise. None of these tunes stick with me, and I literally don't even notice the music when playing the game. I get that film score is a genre, but this isn't a movie, it's a video game. And even then, there are better ways to do that type of music in games. But when I'm shooting shit up, I want to listen to some bangers, man, you know? In the end, the best way I can describe Ratchet 2016 is that it's a game. It's really not a bad one, but this game is so unremarkable that I probably won't even remember it after this video is out. It's no wonder that the reboot and the reimagining of this franchise basically flopped, because new fans didn't see much beyond this super sanitized, cute and cuddly world, while old fans were basically alienated. In the end, nobody won. At all. I don't know how to end this video.
Kids love their social medias. Hashtag Gadgetron.